We created it into 4 meetings. The team building meeting was an essential meeting. The team building meeting allowed the group to come together and coalesce as a community. We had a team purpose statement. We really got this group focused and aligned. And the community got built, so there was that support mechanism. We found that without a team building meeting that enabled all those things to happen, the teams did not coalesce. They were not a support group, and they often would dissolve. So the team building meeting was also where we started what we called we called them preemptive interventions. All the issues that might cause the team to break down in terms of how the team performed together, we tried to do an intervention at that point. And we created the guidelines for how the team could perform as a high-performance team to get real behavior change and substantial behavior change. And then they would go to the next meetings, like the second was on lifestyle practices. They would say what they were committing to doing, and then they would get support from their team to help them do it, and they would make a commitment, and they'd be witness for that commitment, and they'd have to look their neighbors in the eye in the next meeting and tell them what they did or they didn't do. And one of the more exciting things that happened was that we got people to actually help one another make the changes. You know what? I'd love to weatherize I'd love to put, weather stripping around my windows, but I don't really quite know how to do that. Or where can we get a solar installation? Or who knows some good contractors to do retrofitting? Those conversations began to happen. And that was the process. And then at the end, they were invited to consider taking on larger projects. So this is a sample of a behavioral change action, washing and drying clothes efficiently. A simple action. Again, 1-page recipe, why act, 10 seconds. You read that and you know why you're engaged. Not a whole long treatise. One of the things we learned along the way is the more information we gave to people, the less they were actually inclined to change behavior. Very interesting counterintuitive phenomenon. I thought about it, I know about it, therefore I've done it. Was kind of what we discovered was coming out of that. Just enough to get them in action. Then the recipe, the time required, the materials required, the CO2 reductions, and they were off and running. This was the lifestyle action plan. They would, in 5 minutes, figure out which actions to take. They would have a number associated with it. They get their 5,000 or more pounds, and they were off and running. An example of the team topic meeting guide. Here's what people were looking at in terms of how to run a meeting. Again, a recipe format, time associated, and they were off and running. So we built the program. And what we found was there was a budding movement of community groups, of cities, of faith-based groups, of lots and lots of people saying, what can we do? And we found ourselves at the epicenter of a movement that started to take off. And what we began to get very clear on was that this movement needed tools, it needed support systems, and that we had spent the last 20 years building those and that we could drive change. So our goal was to identify early adopter communities using the low-carbon diet program and the social change 2.0 methodology. We designed a community organizing model that was built around local governments, local community groups, and local businesses coming together. Each of them would commit to getting up to 50 eco-teams formed over a 3-year period, and they were off and running with this model. So here's an example of the scaling strategy that we built. This was for the city of Berkeley. They have 100,000 people, but you could take this model and you could apply it to a building, or you could apply it to a block, or you could apply it to any subset. 2.5 people per household equals 40,000 households. And if you write off the laggards, you have 34,000 households. If you look at 8 households per team, you have 4,250 eco-teams. And then if you take those 50 eco-teams, which we have found groups were able to do, and you divide 50 into the number of eco-teams, you get 85 local groups. and you begin to know how you can get a wholesale approach for scaling this thing up. And we began to look to find cities that were willing to do this with some training. We then began looking at how to work with universities because students were willing to engage, and we built a program for getting students driving this process within their communities. Similarly, with businesses, we started looking at how to get companies to reduce their footprint, engage employees to do the same, and then have those employees volunteer in the community to do the same. We called that the Cool Corporate Citizen Program. We worked with Nike and a number of other companies. We built a feedback system to show the drops filling the bucket rather than being drops in the bucket. And last tool was we created a tool to create the social cohesiveness. We brought people together in a room like this, sat around a table, and they shared their fears and their hopes. How many of you have done World Cafe? Any of you? Well, it's a tool where you have paper on a table. Well, basically, I'll show you a slide in a moment what it looks like. But basically, time, yeah. Okay, let me shoot to the end of this. This is what the room looks like. This is what a table looks like. People are writing their fears and their hopes about what they feel. They were able to actually engage emotionally. And what we would find was when we brought people through that, we got most of the people to start eco teams through this process. So last but not least, we have a set of tools. We're now rolling this out. We partnered with Al Gore's community of 1,000 presenters, and they started getting the word out. Out of that, 300, and other things, 300 cool communities started taking place across the country. 13 of those are going to scale, including Davis, that's committed to being carbon neutral. The state of Massachusetts, through this group called Massachusetts Climate Action Network, now has 13 cities that are committing to do that. And this lays out some of the examples of what's happening in these places. These are some of the cities in Massachusetts. This is the footprint we're trying to tackle, which is a significant part of the footprint is the residential sector. And we're off and running to see if we can get some serious carbon reduction in the state. So I will end with my favorite quote from Rilke, which I think is the call to action that I think many of us have responded to. Again and again in history, some people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd, and they move to broader, deeper laws. They carry strange customs with them, and they demand room for bold and audacious action. The future speaks ruthlessly through them. They change the world. So on that note, I thank you for your attention.